Welcome to a Frico tale, where ancient wisdom meets modern storytelling, and every tale carries the heartbeat of Africa. What if I told you that the most dangerous predator in any African village doesn't prowl the bush at night, but stands behind a pulpit on Sunday morning? This is the story of how 53 women lost more than their underwear to a man they called Pastor. They nearly lost their souls. Settle in. My people, for this tale, will make you question everyone you've ever trusted with your prayers. In the heart of Ogbomoso, where red earth meets endless sky, there stood a church that seemed to breathe with its own life. Mountain of heavenly fire, ministries rose like a clay giant from the dusty ground, its tin roof catching the fierce Nigerian sun and throwing it back in blinding flashes. Every Sunday, the building swelled with the voices of women, mothers, daughters, widows and wives, their songs rising like incense to pierce the heavens. The church had not always been this way. Old Papa Adebayo, who sold roasted groundnuts by the roadside, remembered when it was nothing but four walls and a dream. "Ah, my children," he would tell anyone who would listen, shaking his grizzled head. "That place used to be as empty as a dried calabash." Pastor Elisha would preach to chairs and crickets. Even the lizards on the walls seemed bored. But something had changed 3 years ago, something that made women travel from distant villages, clutching their life savings and their deepest fears, believing that within those walls lay the key to their deliverance. Pastor Elisha Obina moved across the pulpit like a man possessed by divine fire. His voice, deep as thunder rolling across the savannah, commanded every ear in the packed sanctuary. Sweat poured down his dark skin despite the struggling ceiling fan that turned lazily overhead, casting shifting shadows across his animated face. When he raised his arms, the congregation rose as one. When he whispered, they leaned forward as if their very lives depended on catching every word. "My sisters in Christ," he declared, his eyes scanning the sea of upturned faces. "The enemy has planted thorns in your marriage beds. He has sent spirit husbands to torment you in your sleep, to steal your peace, to block your blessings." The women nodded vigorously, many weeping openly, their wrapper cloths clutched tightly around their waists. They had come from Ibadan, from Ilorin, from villages with names like whispered prayers, all seeking freedom from invisible chains. Pastor Elisha had built his reputation on delivering the captives, and his methods, though mysterious, seemed to work miracles that left medical doctors scratching their heads in wonder. Sister Grace Aduni had not slept peacefully in 7 years. Every night, as darkness settled over her small compound, like a heavy blanket, he would come, the shadow man with eyes like burning coals who claimed to be her husband in the spirit realm. She would wake, gasping, her wrapper soaked with cold sweat, the taste of fear bitter in her mouth. Her earthly husband, Tunda, had grown tired of her midnight terrors and had taken to sleeping in the parlor, leaving her alone to face her tormentor. This morning, she sat in the front row of Mountain of Heavenly Fire Ministries, her hands trembling as she clutched her worn Bible. The other women around her hummed softly, their voices creating a cocoon of comfort, but Grace felt as fragile as an egg balanced on a needle's point. When Pastor Elisha's eyes found hers during the service, she felt a spark of hope for the first time in years. After the service, when he called her name for private counseling, she practically floated to his office, her heart hammering with desperate faith. Perhaps today would be the day her nightmare finally ended. The counseling room behind the main sanctuary was small and intimate, decorated with religious artifacts from across Africa, wooden crosses from Ghana, prayer beads from Ethiopia, and painted gourds that seemed to watch visitors with ancient eyes. Pastor Elisha sat across from Grace, his fingers steepled as he listened to her pour out her heart. The story came in broken pieces, the dreams that felt more real than waking life, the exhaustion that clung to her like morning mist, the growing distance in her marriage. "Sister Grace," Pastor Elisha said finally, his voice soft but commanding, "the spirits that torment you are not ordinary demons. They have made covenants with objects in your possession, intimate things that hold the essence of your womanhood." Grace's eyes widened as he continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "Your undergarments, especially the bras you wear closest to your heart, have become altars of bondage. The enemy uses them to maintain his claim over you." The words hit her like physical blows, but they also brought a strange relief. Finally, an explanation for her suffering that made sense. "Bring me the 2 bras you wear most often," he instructed, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "I will take them to the altar and break every evil covenant. But you must trust me completely. Partial obedience brings partial deliverance." Grace walked home that evening with Pastor Elisha's words echoing in her mind like a broken record. The red dust, kicked up by her feet, seemed to mirror the turmoil in her heart. She had never heard of such a method, but then again, her grandmother had always said that desperate times called for desperate measures. As she entered her small compound, she found Tunde sitting under the mango tree, sharpening his farming tools with long, methodical strokes. "How was church today, my wife?" he asked, without looking up, his voice carrying the weight of years of disappointment. Grace hesitated, then decided to tell him everything. Tunde's hands stilled on his tools as she explained Pastor Elisha's diagnosis and proposed cure. For a long moment, silence stretched between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. Finally, Tunde sighed deeply and met her eyes. "Grace, if there is even a small chance this will bring you peace, then do what the pastor says. I am tired of watching you suffer, and I am tired of suffering with you." That night, Grace carefully folded her 2 best bras into a black nylon bag, whispering prayers over them like a mother blessing her children before a long journey. Word of Sister Grace's upcoming deliverance spread through the women's fellowship like wildfire through dry grassland. Within a week, dozens of sisters had approached Pastor Elisha with similar requests, their faces bright with hope and expectation. Sister Folake brought hers wrapped in her grandmother's old head tea, convinced that the cloth would add extra spiritual protection. Sister Ronki, a trader from the main market, arrived with 3 different bras, explaining that she wanted to cover all possibilities. Pastor Elisha received each offering with the solemnity of a high priest, his office becoming a steady stream of women clutching black bags like sacred offerings. "The enemy is trembling," he announced during Wednesday night service, his voice carrying across the packed sanctuary. "When we attack his strongholds with such unity, he has no choice but to release his captives." The congregation erupted in praise, their clapping hands creating a rhythm like approaching rain. But in the midst of the celebration, one woman sat unmoved, her trained eyes watching everything with the precision of a hawk circling its prey. Sister Hannah Ademola had been a nurse for 15 years before she became a born-again Christian, and her medical training had taught her to question everything twice before believing it once. She sat in the back row during services, watching the other women with a mixture of compassion and growing unease. When Pastor Elisha began his teaching about covenant garments, something in her spirit recoiled like a snake from fire. After the service, Hannah approached the pastor with her questions carefully wrapped in respectful language. "Pastor, in all my years of studying the Bible, I have never come across this teaching about undergarments holding covenants. Can you show me the scriptural basis?" Pastor Elisha's eyes flashed with something that looked less like divine inspiration and more like irritation, but his voice remained smooth as palm oil. "Sister Hannah, the ways of God are higher than our ways. Sometimes he reveals mysteries to his chosen vessels that cannot be found in mere book knowledge. Obedience is better than sacrifice." The conversation left Hannah feeling like she had touched something cold and slimy in dark water. That night, she knelt by her bed and prayed for wisdom, asking God to reveal the truth behind the pastor's methods. His sister Amanda Olayinka had always been the questioning type, a trait that had served her well during her nursing training and continued to guide her as she navigated life in Ogbomoso. Unlike the other women, she had noticed things. The way Pastor Elisha's eyes lingered too long on certain sisters, the locked cabinet in his counseling room that he claimed contained spiritual warfare materials, and most disturbing of all, his contradictory explanations about what happened to the collected bras. Unable to shake her growing suspicions, Amanda made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her Nokia phone and dialed her cousin Femi, who worked as an inspector with the State Criminal Investigation Department in Ilorin. "Femi, I need to talk to you about something strange happening at my church," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she stood in her small kitchen, stirring a pot of stew that had long since finished cooking. "It sounds crazy, but I think our pastor is collecting women's underwear for some kind of ritual. And it's not the holy kind." The line went quiet for so long that Amanda thought the call had dropped. Then Femi's voice came back, serious and alert. "Amanda, crazy things happen more often than sane people want to believe. Tell me everything." Inspector Femi Adebayo had seen enough in his 12 years with the CID to know that evil often wore the mask of righteousness. After his conversation with Amanda, he spent 3 sleepless nights researching ritual practices and consulting with colleagues who specialized in cult activities. What he discovered made his blood run cold: a growing network of fake pastors who used religious authority to collect personal items for dark spiritual commerce. The plan he developed was as simple as it was dangerous. Sergeant Enodi Okoro, known to her friends as Goy, was one of the department's best undercover operatives. She had the acting skills to become whatever a case required, and the courage to walk into the lion's den with nothing but her training and a hidden recording device. "I need you to become the most desperate, broken woman who ever walked into that church," Femi instructed her as they sat in his small office, surrounded by case files and empty coffee cups. "Make him want to help you so badly that he'll show his true nature." Goy nodded, her eyes already taking on the haunted look of a woman at the end of her rope. She had been born for roles like this, and she could feel the familiar thrill of the hunt beginning to course through her veins. Sister Mary Chioma, as Goy now called herself, arrived at Mountain of Heavenly Fire Ministries on a rainy Sunday morning, her wrapper soaked through and her eyes red from what appeared to be hours of weeping. She stumbled into the service late, causing heads to turn as she found a seat in the middle section, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. During the praise and worship, she lifted her hands half-heartedly, as if even the act of praising God required more strength than she possessed. Pastor Elisha's radar for broken women was finely tuned, and he spotted Mary immediately. During his sermon about spiritual husbands and demonic covenants, he made eye contact with her repeatedly, and each time she would nod vigorously, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. After the service, when he called for those who needed deliverance, Mary practically ran to the altar, falling to her knees and crying out in Igbo about the spirit man who visited her every night, stealing her peace and blocking her marriage. The performance was so convincing that even some of the seasoned prayer warriors began weeping with her, laying hands on her back and interceding on her behalf. Pastor Elisha watched it all with the satisfied smile of a fisherman who had just felt a big fish take the bait. For 3 weeks, Mary Chioma played her role to perfection. She attended every service, joined the women's fellowship, and slowly began sharing more details of her spiritual torment with the other sisters. She spoke of dreams where shadow figures claimed ownership over her body, of failed relationships that ended mysteriously, and of a growing desperation that had driven her to attempt suicide twice. The women embraced her completely, praying over her, fasting for her breakthrough, and sharing their own stories of deliverance through Pastor Elisha's ministry. Finally, during a particularly intense counseling session, Pastor Elisha delivered the words Goy had been waiting to hear. "Sister Mary, the time has come for your complete deliverance. The covenants binding you are attached to your most intimate garments. You must bring me your 2 most frequently worn bras so I can break every chain through intensive prayer and fasting." Goy's heart raced, but her voice remained broken and desperate as she agreed. That evening, she sent Femi a simple text message that made him immediately begin mobilizing his team. "The fish has taken the bait. Tomorrow we reel him in." The address Amanda had provided led to a modest compound in the older part of Ogbomoso, where Pastor Elisha lived far from the prying eyes of his congregation. To anyone passing by, it looked like the home of any middle-class Nigerian, a small bungalow with a well-maintained garden and a satellite dish on the roof. But Femi's instincts, honed by years of investigating the worst of human nature, told him that the real secrets lay hidden beneath this veneer of normalcy. The raid happened at dawn, when the morning mist still clung to the ground like ghosts reluctant to face the light. Femi and his team moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding the compound before Pastor Elisha even realized what was happening. The initial search revealed nothing unusual: a normal sitting room with religious pictures on the walls, a kitchen that smelled of yesterday's stew, bedrooms that looked lived in but unremarkable. It was Goy who noticed that the master bedroom's wardrobe seemed unusually deep, and when they moved it aside, they discovered something that would haunt their dreams for years to come. Behind the false wall lay a chamber that belonged more to nightmare than reality. Hundreds of bras hung from the ceiling like grotesque decorations, each one labeled with a woman's name and date of collection. The walls were lined with shelves containing journals filled with cramped handwriting, photographs of women glued to pieces of underwear, and glass jars containing substances that made the hardened officers step back in revulsion. In the center of the room sat an altar made from what appeared to be human bones. topped with a calabash stained dark with what could only be blood. Femi felt his stomach turn as he read from one of the journals. Written in Pastor Elisha's careful script, Sister Grace delivered bras on 15th March. Covenant sealed. Payment received from Chief Adebayo for business prosperity ritual. Power increasing. The entries went back 3 years, documenting the systematic spiritual exploitation of dozens of women. Their most intimate garments sold to the highest bidders for use in money rituals, love charms, and power ceremonies. "Dear God," whispered Sergeant Okoro, her voice barely audible as she photographed the evidence. "How many women's lives has he destroyed?" Pastor Elisha sat in the CID interrogation room looking nothing like the powerful man of God who had commanded audiences of hundreds. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes darted nervously around the sterile room, and his hands shook as if he were suffering from fever. The confident voice that had once proclaimed divine revelations now came out as a whisper, and the man who had claimed to cast out demons looked very much like someone who needed deliverance himself. "The journals, the bras, the altar, the blood, explain it all," Femi said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen too much evil to be shocked by any story. At first, Pastor Elisha tried to maintain his innocence, claiming that the police had planted evidence that his enemies were trying to destroy his ministry. But as Femi read from the journals in his own handwriting, describing transaction after transaction, the facade began to crumble like a mud wall in the rainy season. "You want to know the truth?" he finally said, his voice breaking like a teenage boy's. "You want to know how a man of God becomes a servant of darkness? Sit down, Inspector. This story will teach you things they don't put in police training manuals." The confession that poured from Pastor Elisha's lips was like poison leaving a wound, painful but necessary for healing to begin. He told of humble beginnings, preaching to empty chairs and borrowing money to keep the church lights on. He spoke of the mockery he endured, the whispers about the pastor whose own prayers seemed to bounce off the ceiling, the growing desperation that ate at him like acid. "For 2 years I fasted and prayed, begging God to bless my ministry, but the church remained empty, and my faith began to crack like dry earth." Then came the 40-day fast in the Ogboja forest, where ancient trees held secrets older than memory. On the 30th night, when hunger had made him delirious and desperate, a figure emerged from the shadows, tall, well-dressed, speaking with a voice like honey mixed with sulfur. The stranger's offer was simple: power, wealth, a congregation that would follow him blindly, miracles that would make people forget their skepticism. All he required in return were tokens, intimate items that carried the spiritual essence of women, collected under the guise of deliverance ministry. "I was weak," Pastor Elisha whispered, tears flowing freely now. "I told myself it was just one compromise, that I could use the devil's tools for God's work. But evil is like quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink." News of Pastor Elisha's arrest spread through Ogbomoso like a bushfire in the Harmattan season. The women who had trusted him with their most intimate secrets and desperate hopes gathered at the church, their faces masks of shock, shame, and rage. Sister Grace sat in the front row where she had once hung on his every word, her hands clutching the same Bible she had carried when seeking deliverance. But now it felt heavy as a stone in her lap. Amanda stood before the congregation, her nursing uniform giving her words additional authority as she addressed the shocked assembly. "My sisters, our shame is not in being deceived. It is in staying silent now that we know the truth. Evil flourishes in darkness, but it withers when exposed to light. We must speak, we must testify. We must ensure that no other woman suffers what we have suffered." One by one, the women began to stand, their voices joining together in a chorus of testimony that would echo through the corridors of justice. Sister Grace was the first to speak, her voice trembling but determined. "I gave him my undergarments, seeking freedom from spiritual bondage, and instead he bound me to something worse than any nightmare. But today we break free together." The trial of Pastor Elisha became a watershed moment for the entire community. As investigations deepened, authorities uncovered a network of fake pastors and traditional priests who traded in stolen spiritual items across 3 states. The women of Mountain of Heavenly Fire Ministries, once victims of exploitation, became symbols of courage and resilience. Their testimonies sent shockwaves through religious communities, sparking conversations about accountability, discernment, and the difference between true spiritual authority and manipulation. In the end, as the judge read the verdict that would send Pastor Elisha to prison for 15 years, Sister Grace felt something she hadn't experienced in 7 years: perfect peace. That night, for the first time since her nightmare began, she slept without fear, knowing that the true demons had been exposed and defeated not by mysterious rituals or stolen garments, but by the courage of women who refused to let evil hide behind the mask of religion. The mountain of heavenly fire still stood, but now it housed a new congregation, one led by women who had learned that true spiritual power comes not from blind obedience to human authority, but from the courage to question, the strength to speak truth, and the wisdom to distinguish between the light of heaven and the deceptive flames of hell. Sister Hannah, the former nurse who had first questioned the pastor's methods, now led Bible studies where women learned to study Scripture for themselves. Amanda started a support group for survivors of spiritual abuse. And Grace? She became a counselor, helping other women recognize the difference between genuine spiritual warfare and manipulative exploitation. On the first anniversary of Pastor Elisha's conviction, the women gathered not in mourning but in celebration. They had planted a garden where his hidden chamber once stood, and now flowers bloomed where evil had once taken root. As they sang together under the African sun, their voices rising in harmony, they knew they had learned the most important lesson of all, that the greatest miracle is not in supernatural signs and wonders, but in ordinary women finding the courage to stand up and say, "No more." Thus ends the tale of the deceiver's covenant, a reminder that in every community, in every generation, evil seeks to wear the mask of righteousness. But where there is courage to question and strength to stand together, truth will always triumph over deception, and light will always overcome darkness. Remember, my people, the most dangerous predator is not the one who hides in darkness, but the one who stands in the light claiming to speak for God. Trust your instincts, ask your questions, and never let anyone convince you that blind faith is the same thing as true faith. This has been an Africo tale. May wisdom guide your steps and may courage guard your heart.